The vultures were already circling when Vincent Garrett first saw the crumpled figure in the dust. And for a moment, he thought he was looking at just another corpse the desert had claimed. The sun beat down mercilessly on the Texas plains that September afternoon in 1878, turning the air into something thick and suffocating. And Vincent had been riding for 3 days straight tracking a stolen mare when he spotted what looked like a pile of discarded clothing near a cluster of mesquite trees. But then he saw the fingers twitch, just barely, and his heart lurched in his chest. He spurred his horse forward, covering the distance in seconds, and threw himself from the saddle before the animal had fully stopped. The woman lying face down in the dirt was young, probably no more than 23 or 24, with long dark hair matted with blood and sand. Her dress was torn in several places, and he could see bruises blooming purple and black across her exposed arms. There was a bullet wound in her shoulder, still seeping blood, and when he gently turned her over, her eyes fluttered open for just a second before closing again. "Stay with me," Vincent said, his voice rough with urgency. He was 26, old enough to have seen death more times than he cared to count, but something about this woman made his chest tighten with a fierce determination he had not felt in years. "I'm not going to let you die out here alone." He worked quickly, pulling his canteen from his saddle and carefully dripping water between her cracked lips. She coughed weakly, and he saw her throat work as she tried to swallow. Her eyelids flickered again, and this time he caught a glimpse of green eyes, clouded with pain and confusion. "Who did this to you?" he asked, knowing she probably could not answer but needing to say something, anything, to keep her focused on his voice. "Who left you out here?" Her lips moved, forming words he could not quite hear, and he leaned closer. "Dalton," she whispered, so faintly he almost missed it. "The Dalton gang. They thought I saw too much." Vincent's jaw tightened. He knew of the Dalton gang, a ruthless group of outlaws who had been terrorizing the area between Llano and Austin for the past 6 months. They robbed stages, banks, and anyone unlucky enough to cross their path, and they were not known for leaving witnesses alive. This woman was lucky to be breathing at all, though looking at her now, he wondered if luck was the right word for it. "My name is Vincent," he said, carefully sliding his arms beneath her. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe. This is going to hurt, but I need you to hold on." She made a small sound of pain as he lifted her, and he saw tears squeeze from beneath her closed eyelids. He settled her as gently as he could across his saddle, then swung up behind her, holding her carefully against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel how cold she was despite the brutal heat of the afternoon sun. She was going into shock, he realized, and if he did not get her help soon, she would not make it through the night. Llano was the nearest town, but it was still a good 4 hours' ride, and Vincent was not sure she had 4 hours. He knew there was an old line shack about an hour north, a place where ranchers sometimes stayed during cattle drives. It was not much, just 4 walls and a roof, but it would give him shelter and a chance to tend her wounds properly. He turned his horse and kicked it into a steady lope, one arm wrapped protectively around the woman's trembling form. The ride seemed to take forever, every minute marked by her shallow breathing and the occasional whimper of pain. Vincent found himself talking to her, telling her about anything and everything just to fill the silence. He told her about his ranch outside Llano, about the horses he raised, about the sister he had lost to fever when he was 15. He did not know if she could hear him, but he kept talking anyway, hoping that somehow his voice would anchor her to life. When the line shack finally came into view, Vincent felt a rush of relief so powerful it made him dizzy. He dismounted carefully, easing the woman down into his arms, and kicked open the door. The interior was dusty and sparse, with just a narrow cot, a pot-bellied stove, and a rough wooden table, but it was shelter, and that was all that mattered. He laid her on the cot and quickly set about building a fire. The sun would be setting soon, and the desert nights could be brutally cold. Once he had flames crackling in the stove, he turned his attention back to the woman. Her breathing had become more labored, and he knew he needed to deal with that bullet wound immediately. Vincent had learned basic doctoring from his mother, who had been the closest thing to a healer their community had when he was growing up. He heated water in a battered pot he found in the corner, then carefully cut away the blood-soaked fabric of her dress around the wound. The bullet had gone clean through her shoulder, which was a blessing, but the wound was angry and inflamed, and he worried about infection. As he cleaned the injury, the woman's eyes opened fully for the first time. She stared up at him with those startling green eyes, and he saw fear and confusion warring in their depths. "Easy," he said softly. "You're safe now. My name is Vincent Garrett. I found you out in the desert." "Delilah," she whispered. "Delilah Porter." "That's a pretty name," he said, keeping his voice gentle and steady as he worked. "I know this hurts, Delilah, but I need to get this wound clean. Can you tell me what happened?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might have passed out again, but then she spoke, her voice gaining a little strength. "I was traveling to Lano to stay with my aunt. The stage was held up by the Dalton gang near Enchanted Rock. They took everything, but that was not enough for them. One of them, the leader, he recognized me from Austin. He knew my father." "Who's your father?" Vincent asked, though he focused on bandaging her shoulder, tearing strips from his spare shirt to make proper dressings. "Judge Thomas Porter," Delilah said, and Vincent's hand stilled for just a moment. Everyone in this part of Texas knew Judge Porter, a hard man who had sent more than his share of outlaws to the gallows. The leader, his name was Silas Dalton. He said my father had hung his brother 2 years ago. He said he was going to send a message. Her voice broke on the last word, and tears began streaming down her face. Vincent finished tying off the bandage and then gently wiped her cheeks with a damp cloth. "He shot me and told the others to leave me for the vultures," she continued, her whole body shaking now. "They laughed. They rode away and left me bleeding in the dirt, and I thought that was how I was going to die, alone and forgotten in the middle of nowhere." "But you did not die," Vincent said firmly, covering her hand with his. Her fingers were so small and cold in his calloused palm. "You're here and you're alive, and I promise you, Delilah Porter, I'm not going to let anything happen to you." She looked up at him with such raw vulnerability that something shifted in Vincent's chest, some long, dormant part of his heart waking up after years of being carefully locked away. He had not let himself care about anyone, not really, since his sister died. It was easier that way, safer. But looking down at this brave woman who had survived something that should have killed her, he felt all his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Over the next few days, Vincent tended to Delilah with a devotion that surprised even him. He rode into Lano and bought proper medical supplies, food, and blankets, then rode back to the line shack before anyone could ask too many questions. He was not ready to take her into town yet, not until she was stronger and not until he was sure the Dalton gang was not still looking for her. Delilah's fever broke on the 3rd night, and when she woke, her eyes were clear and focused. Vincent was dozing in a chair beside the cot, his head tilted back against the wall, and she watched him for a long moment before speaking. "You stayed," she said, and he jerked awake, immediately alert. "Of course I stayed," he replied, leaning forward to press his hand against her forehead. No fever. Relief flooded through him. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was shot and left for dead," she said, and there was a hint of humor in her voice that made him smile. "But better than I did." "You saved my life, Vincent Garrett." "I just happened to be in the right place at the right time," he said, but she shook her head. "You did more than that. You stayed with me. You could have taken me to Lano and left me with the doctor, but you stayed. Why?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, trying to find the right words. "Because nobody should die alone in the desert," he finally said. "And because from the moment I saw your hand move, I knew I could not walk away." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that felt both brand new and ancient, like they had known each other in another lifetime. Delilah reached out and took his hand, and Vincent felt the warmth of her touch all the way to his bones. As the days passed and Delilah grew stronger, they talked for hours. She told him about growing up in Austin, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her complicated relationship with her stern father who loved the law more than he loved his own daughter. She talked about her dreams of becoming a teacher, about the little school she had been hired to work at in Lano before the stage robbery had changed everything. Vincent told her about his ranch, about the horses he bred and trained, about the lonely years since his sister's death when he had thrown himself into work and forgotten how to really live. He told her about his parents, both gone now, and about the dreams he had once had of building something lasting, something that mattered. They discovered they both loved storms, the way the sky turned green and the wind smelled like rain and possibility. They both preferred coffee black and strong, and they both had a weakness for peach pie. They argued good-naturedly about whether summer or winter was better, about whether horses or dogs made better companions, about 100 small things that made them laugh and forget, at least for a moment, how they had come to be in this small shack together. 2 weeks after Vincent had found her, Delilah was well enough to walk outside. He helped her to a flat rock near the shack where they could watch the sunset, and she leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, as the sky turned gold and crimson and purple. "I should send word to my father," she said quietly. "He must think I'm dead." "I'll ride into Lano tomorrow and send a telegram," Vincent promised. "But Delilah, there's something I need to tell you first." She lifted her head to look at him, and he was struck again by how beautiful she was, even with the fading bruises on her face and the shadows under her eyes. "What is it?" "I've been thinking," he began, choosing his words carefully. "The Dalton gang is still out there. They're still dangerous. Your father is going to want you to come back to Austin, where he thinks you will be safer, but I don't think you should go. Not alone, anyway." "What are you saying?" Delilah asked, though he could see in her eyes that she already knew. "I'm saying that these past 2 weeks, taking care of you, getting to know you, it's made me realize something. I don't want you to leave. I know it's crazy, I know we barely know each other, but Delilah, I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment Vincent wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. But then Delilah smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face, and reached up to cup his cheek with her hand. "I don't think it's crazy at all," she whispered. "Because I'm falling in love with you too." Vincent kissed her then, gently because she was still healing, but with all the emotion he had been holding back for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless and smiling. "So what do we do now?" Delilah asked. "Now I take you to Lano," Vincent said. "I take you to the doctor to make sure you're really healing properly, and then we send that telegram to your father. And then, if you're willing, I'd like to court you properly. I want to do this right, Delilah." "I think I'd like that very much," she said, and kissed him again. The next morning they rode into Lano together, Delilah sitting in front of Vincent on his horse, wrapped in his coat against the autumn chill that had started to creep into the air. The town was bustling with activity when they arrived, and more than a few heads turned to watch as Vincent helped Delilah down in front of the doctor's office. Dr. Samuel Hayes was a kind man in his 50s who asked no questions as he examined Delilah's shoulder and pronounced her healing well. He gave Vincent instructions for changing the dressings and told Delilah to take it easy for at least another month. From the doctor's office, they went to the telegraph office, where Delilah composed a carefully worded message to her father explaining that she was alive and safe in Lano. The response came back within an hour, Judge Porter's relief and anger evident even in the clipped telegraphic language. He was coming to Lano immediately, he said, and he expected Delilah to be ready to return to Austin with him. "He's not going to like that I want to stay," Delilah said as they sat in the small restaurant attached to the hotel, sharing a meal of beef stew and fresh bread. "Does that bother you?" Vincent asked, watching her carefully. Delilah was quiet for a moment, stirring her stew thoughtfully. "My whole life, I've done what my father wanted. I went to the schools he chose, I dressed the way he thought proper, I accepted the teaching position he arranged for me. But Vincent, when I was lying in that desert waiting to die, all I could think about was how I had never really lived. I had never done anything just because I wanted to, never taken a risk, never followed my heart." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm not going to make that mistake again. My father is going to have to accept that I'm a grown woman capable of making my own decisions." Judge Thomas Porter arrived in Lano 3 days later, and Vincent knew the moment he saw the tall, imposing man step off the stage that this was not going to be an easy conversation. The judge had iron gray hair, cold blue eyes, and a mouth set in a perpetual frown. He swept into the hotel where Delilah was staying and embraced his daughter with what looked more like duty than affection. "Delilah," he said, holding her at arm's length to examine her, "thank God you're alive. When we got word that the stage had been robbed and there were casualties, I feared the worst." "I'm fine, Father," Delilah said, though Vincent could see the tension in her shoulders. "Thanks to Vincent, that is. Father, this is Vincent Garrett. He's the man who found me and saved my life." Judge Porter turned his cold gaze on Vincent, and Vincent met it steadily. He had dealt with difficult men before, and he was not about to be intimidated, not when Delilah's happiness was at stake. "Mr. Garrett," the judge said, offering his hand. His grip was firm to the point of being painful, clearly a test. "My daughter tells me I owe you a debt of gratitude." "No debt necessary," Vincent replied evenly. "I did what any decent person would do. Nevertheless, I am grateful. Now, Delilah, we should discuss your return to Austin. I have already made arrangements with the school board in Lano to release you from your teaching contract, given the circumstances. You can recover at home where you belong." "Father, I'm not going back to Austin," Delilah said, and Vincent felt a surge of pride at the firmness in her voice. "I'm staying in Lano. The school still needs a teacher and I gave them my word." "That was before you were shot and nearly killed," Judge Porter said, his voice rising slightly. "Delilah, be reasonable. The men who did this to you are still out there. You're not safe here." "I'm not safe anywhere," Delilah countered. "If Silas Dalton wants revenge against you, he can find me just as easily in Austin as he can here. At least here I have Vincent." The judge's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly is Mr. Garrett to you, daughter?" Delilah lifted her chin. "He's the man I love, and the man I intend to marry if he'll have me." Vincent's heart stopped for a moment, then began racing. They had not actually discussed marriage yet, though it had been hanging unspoken between them for days. He moved to stand beside Delilah, placing a protective hand on her lower back. "Your daughter has done me the great honor of accepting my courtship," Vincent said, meeting the judge's hard gaze. "And yes, sir, I do intend to ask her to marry me when the time is right. I love her, and I will do everything in my power to keep her safe and make her happy." For a long moment, Judge Porter said nothing. Then, slowly, some of the hardness in his face softened just a little. "You realize what you're taking on. My daughter is strong-willed and stubborn, traits she inherited from her mother. God rest her soul." "I'm aware," Vincent said, and he could not help the small smile that tugged at his lips. "And I would not have her any other way." The judge sighed heavily and turned back to his daughter. "Delilah, are you certain about this? This is not some romantic notion born from trauma and gratitude." "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Delilah said, and Vincent heard the absolute conviction in her voice. "Father, I know you worry about me and I know you want to protect me, but I need you to trust that I know my own heart. Vincent is a good man, an honorable man, and I love him." Judge Porter was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, finally, he nodded. "Very well. But Mr. Garrett, I expect you to come to Austin within the month to ask for my blessing properly. And I will be making inquiries about your character and circumstances. If I find anything that concerns me, we will be having a very different conversation." "I would expect nothing less, sir," Vincent said, though he felt a weight lift from his chest. It was not a wholehearted blessing, but it was acceptance, and that was enough for now. After Judge Porter left to return to Austin, promising to visit again soon, Vincent and Delilah stood together on the porch of the hotel, watching the stage disappear in a cloud of dust. "That went better than I expected," Delilah said, leaning against Vincent. "Your father loves you," Vincent said, wrapping his arm around her. "He just has a strange way of showing it." "Vincent," Delilah said, turning to face him, "I meant what I said in there, about wanting to marry you. I know we have not been courting long, but life is too short and too uncertain to waste time." Vincent cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "Delilah Porter, I have loved you since the moment I saw you fighting to survive in that desert. I loved your strength, your courage, your refusal to give up. Every day since then I have found new reasons to love you. Your kindness, your humor, your passion for teaching, the way you hum when you think nobody is listening. I want to spend the rest of my life discovering everything there is to know about you." He dropped to one knee right there on the hotel porch, not caring who might be watching. "I don't have a ring yet, but I promise I will get you the most beautiful one I can find. Delilah Porter, will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Delilah's face, but she was smiling so wide it must have hurt. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Leno, with half the town in attendance. True to his word, Vincent had traveled to Austin to formally ask Judge Porter for Delilah's hand, and while the judge had been thorough in his questioning, he had ultimately given his blessing. He even walked Delilah down the aisle, and Vincent thought he saw the glimmer of tears in the older man's eyes as he placed his daughter's hand in Vincent's. Delilah wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself with help from the other women in town, and she had never looked more beautiful. Vincent wore his best suit, though he felt stiff and awkward in it, and he could not stop smiling as he watched his bride walk toward him. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed Delilah with all the love and promise he held in his heart. The reception was held at the hotel, with music and dancing and more food than Vincent had seen in years. Even Judge Porter seemed to unbend a little, dancing with his daughter and shaking Vincent's hand with something approaching genuine warmth. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Vincent and Delilah slipped away to the small house Vincent had bought on the edge of town. It was not much yet, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs, and they had plans to expand it as their family grew. "Mrs. Garrett," Vincent said, scooping Delilah up in his arms to carry her over the threshold. "How does it feel to be a married woman?" "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Delilah said, kissing him softly. "Like I'm home." That night, as they lay tangled together in their new bed, Delilah traced lazy patterns on Vincent's chest. "Did I tell you that they caught Silas Dalton?" Vincent's hand stilled on her back. "What?" "When, a few days ago, my father sent word. The Rangers caught him trying to rob a bank in San Antonio. He's going to hang." Vincent was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved," Delilah said honestly. "I know I should probably feel guilty about being glad someone is going to die, but I can't. He tried to kill me, Vincent. He left me to die alone in the desert, and he would have if not for you." "But he didn't," Vincent said, tilting her face up to look at him. "You survived, we found each other, and now we have the rest of our lives ahead of us. That's what matters." Delilah smiled and kissed him again. "I love you, Vincent Garrett. Thank you for refusing to let me die alone." "I love you too," Vincent said, "and I will never let you be alone again." "That's a promise." The first year of their marriage was not always easy. Delilah threw herself into teaching at the Leno schoolhouse, loving her students and the challenge of shaping young minds. Vincent continued to work his ranch, breeding and training horses that were sought after throughout Central Texas. They worked hard, saved carefully, and slowly built a life together. There were difficult moments. Delilah still had nightmares about the shooting, waking up gasping and terrified until Vincent held her and reminded her she was safe. Vincent struggled with the fear that something would happen to her, that he would lose the best thing that had ever happened to him. They learned to talk through their fears, to lean on each other, to be patient with each other's wounds, both visible and invisible. But there were far more moments of joy. Sunday mornings spent in bed talking and laughing. Evenings on the porch watching the sunset. The day Delilah announced she was pregnant, her eyes shining with excitement and just a touch of fear. The way Vincent's face had lit up with such pure happiness that she had started crying. Their son was born in the spring of 1880, during a thunderstorm that shook the house and made the midwife nervous. But Delilah was strong, and when she finally held the squalling red-faced baby in her arms, she thought her heart might burst with love. "What should we name him?" she asked Vincent, who was staring at his son with an expression of complete wonder. "Thomas," Vincent said immediately, "after your father, if that's all right with you." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. Her father had softened considerably since their marriage, visiting often and taking genuine interest in Vincent's ranch and Delilah's teaching. He had been thrilled at the news of the baby, and she knew he would be deeply moved by this gesture. "Thomas Vincent Garrett," she said, testing out the name. "It's perfect." Judge Porter did indeed weep when they told him, holding his tiny grandson with surprising gentleness and whispering promises to teach him about justice and honor and doing what was right. 2 years later, Delilah gave birth to twin daughters, much to everyone's surprise and delight. They named them Clara and Caroline, and the girls had their mother's green eyes and their father's dark hair. The house they had expanded twice already suddenly felt too small again, but it was a good problem to have, Vincent said with a laugh. Delilah stopped teaching to focus on raising their children, though she still helped the older students with reading in the evenings. Vincent's ranch continued to prosper, and he took on a couple of ranch hands to help with the work. They were building something lasting, something that would outlive them both. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Vincent and Delilah would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the Texas plains. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they were simply quiet together, content in each other's presence. Delilah would think back to that day in the desert, to lying in the dirt certain she was going to die, and she would marvel at how much had changed. "You ever think about it?" Vincent asked one evening as if reading her thoughts. "That day I found you, sometimes," Delilah admitted. "But not as much as I used to. It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person." "In a way it did," Vincent said, taking her hand. "We're not the same people we were then. We've grown, we've changed, we've built this life together." "Do you regret it?" Delilah asked. "Stopping that day, taking on all of this." She gestured vaguely toward the house, toward the life they had created. Vincent turned to her, his expression serious. "Delilah Garrett, finding you breathing in that desert was the best thing that ever happened to me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I have never regretted a single moment. Even when the twins had colic and kept us up for 3 months straight," Delilah teased. "Even then," Vincent said, laughing. "Though I will admit there were moments I questioned my sanity." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas playing with his toy horses, making galloping sounds and telling himself an elaborate story. The twins were miraculously napping at the same time, a rare blessing. "I want more," Delilah said suddenly. Vincent looked at her in surprise. "More children. Delilah, 3 is already a handful." "No, I mean yes, maybe eventually, but that's not what I meant. I want more of this. More evenings watching the sunset, more Sunday mornings in bed, more of you teaching Thomas to ride, more of the girls giggling together. I want decades of this, Vincent. I want to grow old with you." Vincent pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "That's the plan, Mrs. Garrett. I intend to spend the next 50 years loving you." "Only 50?" Delilah asked, looking up at him with a smile. "You're right," Vincent said. "Better make it forever, just to be safe." As the years passed, that forever seemed to stretch out before them, full of possibility and promise. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved horses as much as his father did. The twins were wild and adventurous, always getting into mischief and keeping Delilah on her toes. When Thomas was 8 and the twins were 6, Delilah gave birth to another son, Samuel, who was quiet and thoughtful and loved nothing more than curling up with a book. Vincent's ranch became one of the most successful in the area, and people came from as far away as Dallas to buy his horses. Delilah returned to teaching part-time once Samuel started school, and she found she had missed it more than she realized. She had a gift for reaching even the most difficult students, and parents requested her specifically for their children. Judge Porter remained a fixture in their lives until he passed away peacefully in his sleep when Thomas was 15. He had been staying with them in Llano at the time, having more or less retired from the bench and spending his final years enjoying his grandchildren. Delilah grieved deeply for the father who had finally learned to show his love openly, but she was grateful that they had reconciled and that he had gotten to know his grandchildren. On what would have been her father's birthday, a few months after his death, Delilah and Vincent took a ride out to the place where he had found her all those years ago. The mesquite trees were still there, though they looked smaller than she remembered. The desert stretched out endlessly in all directions, beautiful and terrible and utterly indifferent. "I stood right about here," Vincent said, dismounting and helping Delilah down. "I saw the vultures first, circling. Then I saw what I thought was just a pile of clothes." "And you came anyway," Delilah said, slipping her hand into his, "even though you thought I was already dead." "I had to be sure," Vincent said. "And then I saw your fingers move, and it was like my whole world shifted. I knew in that moment that finding you was going to change my life, though I had no idea how much." Delilah looked around at the empty landscape, trying to remember what it had felt like to lie there dying. But the memory had faded, softened by time and happiness, and she found she could barely recall the terror and pain. What she remembered instead was waking up to Vincent's face, to his voice telling her she was going to be all right, to the feeling of his arms around her. "Thank you," she said, turning to face her husband, "for seeing me, for stopping, for refusing to let me die alone." "Thank you for fighting to stay alive," Vincent replied, "for giving me the chance to love you, for building this beautiful life with me." They stood there in the desert for a long time, holding each other and remembering and being grateful for all the years they had been given. When they finally rode back toward home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. As they crested the hill that overlooked their ranch, they could see their children playing in the yard. Thomas was teaching Samuel to rope a fence post while the twins raced their ponies around the paddock. Smoke curled from the chimney, and lights glowed warmly in the windows. It was a scene of perfect domestic tranquility, the kind of life Delilah had never dared to dream about when she was lying in the desert waiting to die. "Home," Vincent said, and there was such satisfaction in his voice that Delilah smiled. "Home," she agreed, and together they rode down toward the house, toward their children, toward the life they had built from dust and hope, and a cowboy's refusal to let a stranger die alone. The years continued to pass, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows that make up a life well lived. The children grew and married and had children of their own. Thomas took over the ranch, running it with the same dedication and skill his father had shown. The twins married brothers from a neighboring ranch and stayed close by. Samuel surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer. Though unlike his grandfather, he focused on defending the poor and disenfranchised rather than prosecuting criminals. Vincent's hair turned silver, and laugh lines deepened around his eyes. Delilah's dark hair streaked with gray, but her green eyes remained as bright and sharp as ever. They grew old together, exactly as they had promised, stealing kisses in the kitchen and holding hands on the porch, and still very much in love after more than 4 decades of marriage. On their 45th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were at least 30 people crammed into the house and spilling out onto the porch, 3 generations of Garretts talking and laughing and telling stories. Thomas made a toast to his parents, speaking eloquently about the love and dedication they had shown each other and their family. Even Samuel, usually so reserved, got choked up talking about how his mother and father had been his model for what a marriage should be. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Vincent and Delilah sat together on their porch in the same spot where they had sat thousands of times before. Vincent's joints ached now, and Delilah tired more easily than she used to, but they were still here, still together, still grateful for every moment. 45 years, Delilah said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday you were carrying me into that lined shack. Other times it feels like we've been together forever. Both things are true, Vincent said, his arm around her shoulders. The years have been long and short, fast and slow, easy and difficult, but I would not trade a single moment of them. Not even when Thomas broke his arm falling off that horse and you blamed yourself for weeks, Delilah asked. Not even then, Vincent confirmed. Though I could have done without the twins' rebellious phase where they insisted on wearing pants and racing the boys. Delilah laughed. They got that from me, I'm afraid, the rebellious streak. And I love you for it, Vincent said, kissing her temple. I love everything about you, Delilah. I love who you were, who you are, and who you're becoming. I love the life we've built and the family we've raised. If I could go back and do it all again, I wouldn't change a thing. I would change one thing, Delilah said thoughtfully, and Vincent looked at her in surprise. I would have told you I loved you sooner. I knew it in the line shack, but I was too afraid to say it. I should have been braver." "You are the bravest person I know," Vincent said firmly. "You survived being shot and left for dead. You defied your father to marry me. You brought 4 children into this world. You have been teaching generations of children for over 40 years. Don't you dare question your own courage." Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Promise me something." "Anything," Vincent said without hesitation. "Promise me that when it's my time, you won't be alone. Promise me you'll let our children take care of you. Don't shut yourself away from the world the way you did after your sister died." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "Only if you promise me the same thing. If I go first, you have to keep living, keep teaching, keep being part of the world. Don't let grief consume you." "I promise," Delilah said. "Though I hope we go together, very old and very happy in our sleep." "That would be ideal," Vincent agreed. "But life rarely gives us ideal endings. What matters is that we've had this time together. What matters is that I stopped that day in the desert, and you were brave enough to keep breathing, and we found each other." They sat together watching the stars come out, one by one, until the sky was full of them. In the distance, a coyote howled, and from the barn, one of the horses whinnied in response. The desert that had nearly claimed Delilah's life stretched out around them, vast and eternal, but here on this porch with Vincent's arm around her, Delilah felt only peace. Vincent and Delilah were blessed with many more years together. They celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. They watched their family tree grow and branch, taking pride in the legacy they had created. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, and Delilah taught her last student when she was 72, retiring only because her eyesight had begun to fail. They took up new hobbies in their retirement. Vincent carved wooden toys for the great-grandchildren, his gnarled hands still capable of creating beautiful things. Delilah dictated her memoirs to Samuel, who carefully transcribed her stories about teaching in frontier Texas. She included the story of how she and Vincent met, wanting future generations to know that even in the darkest moments, hope and love could still bloom. When Vincent passed away at the age of 78, it was peacefully in his sleep, exactly as they had hoped. Delilah grieved deeply, but she kept her promise and did not shut herself away. She remained active in her children's lives, attending every grandchild's wedding and holding every great-grandchild that was born. She told stories about Vincent, keeping his memory alive, and she never stopped wearing the wedding ring he had given her all those years ago. On a warm September afternoon 5 years after Vincent's death, Delilah asked Thomas to take her back to the desert where his father had found her. She was 82 now, frail but still sharp as a tack, and she knew her time was coming soon. "Are you sure, Mama?" Thomas asked, worry creasing his weathered face. "It's a long ride." "I'm sure," Delilah said firmly. "I need to go back one more time." They rode out together, Thomas driving a wagon because his mother could no longer ride horseback. When they reached the spot, marked now by a simple wooden cross Vincent had placed there years ago, Thomas helped Delilah down and steadied her as she walked to the cross. "This is where it all began," Delilah said, running her fingers over the weathered wood. "This is where I should have died but didn't. This is where your father gave me my life back. He always said you saved him as much as he saved you," Thomas said quietly. "He said he was just existing before he found you, going through the motions. You gave him a reason to really live." Delilah smiled, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "We saved each other. That's what love does, I think. It saves us from loneliness, from despair, from our own worst impulses." "Your father and I had 53 years together, Thomas. 53 years of love and laughter and life. Not everyone is so fortunate. I hope I can say the same when I'm your age, Thomas said, putting his arm around his mother. You will, Delilah said confidently. You chose well when you married Ellen. She's strong and kind and she loves you fiercely. That's all you need for a good marriage. They stood together in the desert for a while longer, remembering and honoring the man who had refused to let a stranger die alone, the man whose simple act of compassion had changed so many lives. Then, Thomas helped his mother back into the wagon, and they rode home as the sun began to set. Delilah passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 months later, in the same bed where she had slept beside Vincent for 53 years. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her in her final days, holding her hands and telling her they loved her and promising to take care of each other. Her last words were about Vincent, about how she had missed him and was ready to see him again. They buried her next to Vincent in the Lano Cemetery, under a large oak tree that provided shade in the brutal Texas summers. The headstone was simple but elegant, bearing both their names and the dates of their births and deaths. Below that, at Thomas's suggestion, they carved a single line. In the desert he found her breathing, and together they found life. The story of Vincent and Delilah Garrett became part of local legend, told and retold over the years until it was hard to separate fact from fiction. But their descendants kept the true story alive, passing it down through generations. They told of a cowboy who refused to let a stranger die alone, and a woman who was brave enough to love him. They told of a marriage built on mutual respect and unwavering devotion, of a family raised with love and laughter, of a life that proved that from the darkest moments can come the most brilliant light. And on warm September afternoons, when the sun beat down on the Texas plains just like it had that day in 1878, you could almost imagine seeing them there. A cowboy kneeling in the dust beside a dying woman, refusing to let her face death alone. A woman opening her eyes and seeing hope incarnate. Two souls recognizing each other across the vast desert of human loneliness and reaching out to hold on tight. That was how it began, with compassion and courage, and a refusal to accept that the world had to be cruel. And that was how it continued, through 5 decades of marriage and children and grandchildren, through joy and sorrow and everything in between. Vincent had saved Delilah's life that day in the desert, but what they built together saved them both in ways far deeper and more lasting. Their story was proof that love could bloom even in the harshest environments, that hope could survive even the darkest nights, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we choose to stop, to look, to care about a stranger's suffering. Vincent Garrett had been riding through that desert looking for a stolen horse, but what he found was so much more precious. He found the love of his life, lying in the dust and fighting to breathe. He found his purpose, his partner, his home. And Delilah Porter, left for dead by men who saw her as nothing more than a tool for revenge, found that life held more beauty and possibility than she had ever imagined. She found a man who would cherish her, children who would make her proud, and a legacy that would outlive them both. She found that surviving was only the beginning, that the real miracle was in all the living that came after. In the end, their story was simple. A cowboy found a woman breathing in the desert and refused to let her die alone. And from that single act of human decency grew a love story for the ages, a family that would span generations, and a reminder that we are all responsible for each other, that our choices matter, that stopping to help a stranger can change not just their life but our own in ways we cannot begin to imagine. Vincent and Delilah Garrett lived that truth every day of their long lives together, and their descendants carry it forward still, a legacy more valuable than gold or land or any earthly treasure. They carry forward the knowledge that love is worth fighting for, that life is precious even in its darkest moments, and that none of us should ever have to die alone in the desert, forgotten and unmourned. That was the gift Vincent gave to Delilah, and the gift they both gave to everyone whose life they touched, a gift that echoes still across the Texas plains they both loved so well.